Well, welcome again. I count it a real privilege to be able to share our personal story. Please excuse me for my sense of country humor, because you'll see a little bit of it before this is over. And I hope you can enjoy the ride or the journey, so to speak. And I just want to encourage you, as you see our story, to look at the bright side of things and to know that we serve a God who is able to do above all that we ask or think. So no matter how daunting the task may seem to some of you, especially single folks, I just was reminded by a good friend of ours in the, about back there, that some of the single ladies are a little concerned about being able to tackle a task like this. Well, you know, I can appreciate that. And some of us who have a little larger place and lots of work to do and have a lot of opportunities to help some of the single folks, whether you're a male or a female. And sometimes it is a challenge to take on these tasks when you're by yourself, and I understand that. So don't despair. There is opportunities that wait here and there, and who knows but what our place has been prepared and provided to be a sanctuary for those that for whatever reason can't achieve it on their own. And when the time comes and the Lord inspires you and us and others to reach out to help a helping hand to those that may need it. So that's what we're all about. We're all in this journey together, and we'll arrive at the destination hopefully together as well. So anyway, this is our experience, and I hope you can enjoy it. And this is a little bit about when we first got married, because our journey kind of began about 28 plus years ago. And I'd actually met Lyn in 1987 the very first time. And 5 years later, we decided it was an appropriate time maybe to pursue a life together. And so in 1991, Lyn at the time was living in Colorado on a ranch there with her parents. I was living in Eastern Oregon. I grew up pretty much in that part of the state. We both lived in country life. And she lived in Colorado, and of course I was in Oregon. And when we decided to get married, we decided to kind of meet somewhere in the middle. So we both liked Idaho, and that's where we ended up. So we both were raised in similar environments, and we had the country was part of our life. They grew up. So God arranged this marriage. You know, I have to admit that. He put the two of us together. We met in the most unlikely of places. I met Lyn in Alabama. And we got engaged in Wyoming. We got married at Lake Tahoe, and we moved to Idaho. So it was quite a journey. And Lyn is a fourth-generation Adventist. I was not raised in a particularly Christian home. My parents let the neighbor rancher lady, they owned a ranch next to our place, and she's a heavy set, just a wonderful gal. I can remember her, almost picture her to this day, and that was a long time ago. She would come and get us and take us to Sunday school. And that was my exposure to church life, was once a week going to church with her. She invited me and my older brother, and we had a really good time. We enjoyed that. It was a good fellowship. But I didn't become an Adventist until after my first year of college. And it's a thankfulness for my granddad on my dad's side of the family. He was a Seventh-day Church of God. And I was confused about a few of the things in Scripture that just seemed to kind of point this Sabbath thing. I didn't quite understand that. But I was inquisitive about it, and I never could get a good answer from a Sunday school preacher to answer that question for me. And so I dug a little deeper, and my granddad, who was a Seventh-day Church of God, and I figured that out. So I went and asked him, and he's the one that convinced me that there's more to this than meets the eye, and I decided from that moment on that I was going to take a good look at that, and I did, and over time I joined the church. We decided to look for a place in Idaho. So yes, I talked about it earlier. She moved west, I moved east, and one day when I was trucking through Idaho, we were kind of looking for a place around there to live, and I came into this small mountain community called Council, and it had the prerequisites I was looking for. I wanted to be a place that wasn't so high in the mountains that we'd get tons of snow, but I wanted to be kind of on the edge so we'd have some of that country environment, the trees and mountains and the creeks that were important to what my search was. And we ended up in this place here. This is a general look of the valley around where we live. You can see there's some open hills yet, but there's mountains in the background. And it was just turned out to be a really lovely place. There's a river that runs down through this valley, and every little draw that has a kind of a drainage, there's creeks that run through them also. There's a lot of water there. So I picked up a few real estate magazines and sent them to Lyn. And her and her mom, still living in Colorado, they made the trip three times out to look around properties, and they ended up looking in council with where I sent the paperwork to. And Lyn, I'd like you to tell a little bit about that story.
Well, when there was one property that we looked at and we really liked. It was about 200 acres way up on the mountain somewhere with a creek in it. So I went to the real estate office and I met him at 9 o'clock in the morning, because I never did this before. So anyway, when we sat down, he says, "What are you looking for?" And I told him, I says, "Well, I want to look at this 200 acres. And he looked at us and he says, "Oh, can you hear me now? Okay, got it." So he says, "What do you want to do with this acreage?" He says, "You want to live in it?" And I says, "Well, yeah." And he says, "I'm not going to show it to you." And I says, "Man, is this how they sell real estate?" And so he says, I says, "Why?" He says, "Because you and your mother aren't going to live up, but there's too much snow up there." And I said, "I just came from Colorado, lived at 7,000 feet. We had 2 feet, 2, 3, 4 feet snow, and I'm used to that." But anyway, it was so funny because he just didn't almost show it to us. But then he says, "Okay, what are you looking for?" And I told him, "We want seclusion, we want mountains, we want creeks." You know, I mean, that wasn't very much. And he says, "I just have the place for you. It just came out on the market yesterday. You'll be the first ones I show to." And I says, "Good, let's go." We bought it.
And then they called me and told me what she bought. So we ended up buying this place. You can see it there, the top left of the screen, kind of a view from off the hillside looking at it. And that creek on the right is the creek that goes right past our house, and that's in the spring when the water's a little higher. So it's called Fall Creek, so it comes by its name naturally. It does fall off pretty fast, and it creates a pretty good stream. It's a great hydroelectric potential project there in the making. And that bottom left is the river that's out front. Our property fronts that river, and the creek there goes through it. So we have lots of water, and that was a prerequisite. So we got that river thrown in for good measure. I didn't care if we had a river particular. I just wanted some rolling water someplace. So we were really blessed, and it's been a real blessing ever since. Now then, the fun and interesting experiences begin. As you know, any kind of a farm life that you have, there's challenges. Some are really serious. Some can be funny. Some we think about, and we have our evening laughs every once in a while. We remember when, you know, and they can be really funny. So we weren't especially looking for an off-grid property, but that's what we ended up with. And while I'm talking about this here, since we're off-grid, that means you got to have the generators and other sources of power. Well, when we first bought this place, we didn't have any electric lights in it at all. I'm maybe jumping ahead of myself a little bit, but I want to tell you this funny story. I wanted some kind of a light in our bedroom, so I'm standing up on a ladder about 6 feet off the ground, and I'm trying to clip one of those clip-on lights to a rafter that's in the bedroom, this open beam kind of thing, and it wasn't really a finished project in this house, so there's a lot of rough open beam stuff. And I had a little generator going on the back porch and a drop cord going through the house. And I'm standing on this ladder, and I'm trying to get this light going, and I can't figure out why it's not working. And my wife, we'd only been married just a short period of time, so she's standing there innocently. "What's the matter, honey? Doesn't it work?" And she'd went out and unplugged the cord from the generator. So that was a beginning introduction to her mischievous nature. And but since then, after 28 years, we finally got a solar system put together, and I'm very thankful to Igor. I bought the parts from him, and then he condescended to come help me through I'm not a solar man. I didn't understand how to wire all the components together, and so he helped me figure that out. And praise the Lord, last year, right after Passover, we actually turned the switch on, and we got power now from that building. And it's been an absolute blessing, and we've got more to do to the system yet, but at least it does function, and it's made life so much easier. So now back to the beginning. This is back when we first bought the place. There was no fences that would hold our horses in, and there were the neighbors' cows out. And, well, there was sort of fences, but they hadn't been fixed or repaired in who knows how many years, let's put it that way. So Lyn and I would spend time out multitasking. I remember this one particular night, we were trying to patch up some fences, and Lyn had tried to start some supper on the stove, and she would come out and help me, and the supper got burnt. And so she went back in and tried again. And the third time, we finally gave up and decided a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and we'd just call it a day. And I knew not to complain because somewhere in the kitchen I saw this sign. And so I decided I better not say much. And anyway, back to snow. I was not planning on buying a place that got lots of snow, and so I was properly initiated the very first winter we were there. We got like 12 feet of it. And that was how it piled up. I mean, it settled down to about 6 feet. But when it was about 4 feet, I had no idea it could snow so much at 3,200 feet in elevation. So there's Lyn there after we piled up some of it. But anyway, after 28 years, we found out it only seems to be about 3 feet of average, which is something we can live with. Oh, yeah, I'll tell you. You can bring me, you can tell that story if you'd like. Okay, I'll tell that story. I think it brings it. No, not that one. How do I back up? Okay. We had, well, I did talk a little bit about a machine shed that collapses here. There was this one shed. Now, when I moved here, I felt like, the buildings there had been there forever, they'd probably handle the snow load when I started seeing it stacking up so deep. And this one shed, I looked at it, and it wasn't really sloping much, so I knew the snow wasn't going to slide off. And I was thinking, well, I'm rationalizing that, well, it's been there all these years, and if this is a normal snow winter, I guess that machine shed will hold up. So anyway, I went in the house that night, and I come back out the next morning to look at it. It was flatter than a pancake, and all the machinery and the equipment, everything in the shed was buried under that much snow. And so then I got to looking around, well, if that shed is going to collapse, what else is going to fall down around here? And so I went looking in the barn, and it was the only thing, the rafters where the horses eat, was they were cracking. And the only thing that kept the woodshed from collapsing was the fact we had wood piled to the ceiling. And so anyway, we learned real fast that you don't leave snow on these buildings very long. You get it shoveled off. So where I grew up, we got maybe 1.5 feet of snow, and that was about it. So this was a new education for me. We learned real fast. Now, we shortly had buyer's remorse. At least we thought we did. And that's a picture of the kitchen shortly. I think I got that window replaced there. The next slide will show me doing a little bit of work on it. But that's Lyn's cousin. She came there to help Lyn do some stuff. And you can see the kitchen is made up of, it looks like just a countertop there, and the cupboard doors of just curtains across the doors. And if you look up in the rafters, it had just exposed rough-cut boards up there, and that's where she hung some of her skillets and some of the typical things that you need in a kitchen. So it was rather lacking in finished stuff, and most of the buildings around there, when you get to looking at them, is like they didn't have a building permit to do any of that. You can tell that's for sure. It was pretty sad shape, and so I'm thinking, I think we paid too much for this place. And now that I look back on it, I probably got a pretty good deal, but still, at the time, I was wondering about my sanity. So anyway, back to the very rustic home. We're going to have to call it a house now because it's not a home yet. But I finally replaced a couple of windows there in that kitchen, and I'm working on that a little bit. And we eventually got the kitchen where it looks more like this now. And so it is quite functional. It's not an elaborate home, but we don't need elaborate things, do we? We just need something functional, something that's clean, and it does the job. And anyway, we're really happy with how things are working now there. We're just tickled there. You got something you want to add?
Yeah, I'll tell you a real short story. When the house looked like the other picture. When we first bought that place, I had to go up there and kind of get things fixed because Jack was on the road. He was driving truck. And so my niece and a neighbor and her daughter went up. So there was 4 of us up there. And, of course, we didn't have any furniture or anything in the house. It was just a cabin. We just laid our sleep bags on the floor in the 1 bedroom. So the house had a lot of holes in it and rats. And so one night we were laying there, and I would set out traps, mice traps during the night. So one night we were there, and we heard this trap go off, boom, and then we heard click, 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 click across the floor in the hut. that's no mouse. So I get up, and all of us were sitting up in our sleeping bags in pure darkness because we don't have, nothing but a little flashlight. So I says, well, I'm going to go see what it is. So I get my flashlight, and I walk in the kitchen. I'm looking around. And I didn't see anything. But I said, hey, man, I can't lose a good opportunity here. So I let out a scream. And all I could hear was screaming coming from the bedroom, and they didn't see anything. And I go in there, and I just start laughing. They were sitting up in their sleeping bag just shaking and just screaming, and because they just knew I had to see something terrible. They wanted to kill me. But anyway, I think we found that trap with a mouse about a month later. I don't remember where it went, but there were just holes everywhere, and the rats were everywhere. It was pretty bad.
Told you she was mischievous. There's more stories I could tell, but I won't get into too much of those. So our water supply, or I might add the lack thereof, it was interesting. The water came from a little spring about half again as high as the house, so it didn't have a lot of pressure, and they used a 250-gallon stock tank to collect water that came in from this little pipe that went into the side of the hill, drip, drip, drip. That's about as fast as it came in. And one day I went up there to inspect it, and I found a dead rat floating in this water that we had been drinking. And needless to say, I says, okay, that's it. It had a plywood cover on it, that was some makeshift thing. They'd found some plywood and sort of hit and miss covered. It was, again, more of this stuff, the reasons why I think we paid too much for this place. But at any rate, we got the stock tank replaced. I put a 750-gallon tank in there, a plastic one that sealed, and I put a pipe back into the bank where the water came from, and then this drip, drip, drip just goes in the tank really slow. So we didn't have a lot of extra water. It took a while to fill it up. But one day we didn't have any water in the house, so I decided to go up there and figure out what happened. And I'm looking up there, and my tank is sitting about this high above the ground. It had went from here to there, and I'm saying, how is this possible? Well, something had happened to the line going in to the tank, and it drip was not dripping in it, it was dripping outside of it, and so it filled as we drank the water out of the tank became a boat, and it just floated in the old water that was going around. So then it broke off the pipe at the bottom, of course, and created more problems. So back to the work. I'm digging a ditch now to get that water drained out of there and put the tank back down, and we finally got it sealed. But since then we actually got a much better system. I don't know if we have a picture of it. I don't think we do, but we went about a quarter mile away up one of the draws out there, and we found another spring that's quite a lot better, and put in about a quarter mile of pipe. And now it comes down the hill and into our place, and then back up the hill into a cistern that we built up on the hill, 1,200 and some gallon tank, and then it gravity flows from there back to the house. So we have about 45, 50 pounds of pressure in our house and got plenty of water. It was a huge improvement. And when we bought that place, I'm going to talk about propane lights in a minute. When we bought that place, I just share these stories with you because you don't have to have an elaborate place when you first get started. So you all got to think you can manage it. It'll happen. You can make it work. So that's the reason I share these stories. It's challenging, but it's rewarding. Anyway, when we first got there, there was water plumbed to the kitchen sink only. It had cold water there. There was no hot water tank in the house, and there was a clawfoot bathtub in the bathroom and a toilet. And I think the previous owners just packed water from the creek, flushed the toilet with probably a 5-gallon bucket, and then they filled the bathtub with probably water off the stove or something, and the hot water, and then added cold water to it and made it work. So anyway, we got all that fixed. It didn't take me too long to get water plumbed from everything and get water going everywhere in the house. And we enclosed another room that was semi-finished on the house, and that's where the laundry room ended up being, and put in a hot water tank, a gas one. So now we actually have hot water and all those good things. So it took a while to get it there, but we eventually got some of the plumbing problems taken care of. And then now we're going to talk about the propane lights. That was an interesting story. The propane lights come in, and they had copper tubing going from one light to the other, and it kind of sagged through the kitchen, and they had fittings about every 3 or 4 feet. And it's like they used all kinds of small pieces of pipe to fit all these things together to make it get from one light to the other. And we could smell propane in there several times, and boy, we're nervous about this. So we called the propane company that supplied our propane to the tank outside, and they said, I think you better look at this and see what's going on. And he said, man, I hate to do this to you. I got to condemn this system. And I said, okay, you probably did us a big favor. How that place kept from blowing up, I don't really know. The only thing is it's so drafty, you know, holes here and there. It just had an exchange of air about every 10 minutes, so it probably wouldn't have held much enough to make it blow up. But at any rate, he did us a big favor, so we eventually saved our money and had the whole system redone with all the proper fittings and stuff. And so that's how we managed to have our lights, propane lights, for years and years. It's done a great job. There's only one plug in the entire house, and that was at the end of a drop cord, and the other end went through a hole in the wall and out to a little shed out there, and there's a little generator out there. So that was the extent of their electricity in the house. But I've since, of course, I've got it wired. I've got plug-ins everywhere, lights everywhere, switches everywhere. So when we did run a generator, we had electric lights whenever we needed them. So, or off of our battery pack. And the only way we could charge our batteries at that time was through a generator. Now they're charged with the solar system, and we don't have to listen to motors run all the time. So it's a huge improvement. It's been quite a journey, but we've slowly got things kind of making it work better. Now the skylights, that was a different story. You ever hear the term jerry built? Okay, you know what I mean. And they had taken between the rafters, just cut out a section of roof, and slipped in some plexiglass in underneath the corrugated tin, and it sort of worked. It did provide light, but it didn't keep all the rain out. And we found out when we started remodeling the house and cleaning up some of the original flooring that the floor was rotten beneath every one of them skylights, because it had leaked so many times, and then they just put another layer of floor on it, I guess, and patch it up that way. Well, anyway, we managed to get all that cleaned out and straightened up, and then, of course, in that process, we put down that pergo kind of flooring, you know, the pieces you snap together, and it's got to be kind of flat in order to do that. Well, we started running levels on everything, and we found out the floor is 2 inches out of level in some places. And it took a little bit of work to get that figured out. But you know, this is on a concrete foundation. That's one thing I can't figure out. They must not have used a level when they poured the concrete. So it's interesting. So anyway, horses, fences, and rusty nails. That's a fairly new fence if you look at it. But some of our fences, that makes them look, you know, like that's a Cadillac fence there. And but we built that one. That separates the horses from our orchard area. And our south fence was this old irrigation flume. And this irrigation flume used to provide water to an apple orchard that was built in the 20s and 30s, or actually before that, early 1910, I think it was. And this flume is about yay wide and about that deep. And of course, it had been abandoned for quite a number of years, but that was where our south fence was, and everybody that has property up there, that's their fence line. It follows the shape of the hill as it goes down. It's about 10, 12 miles long, this flume fence. And our horses managed to find holes in that fence, you know, and I would go up there and prop it up and try to make it exist as a fence as best I could. And Lyn's horse that she had at the time, he was a master about figuring out how to get out. And after about our third winter there, they decided they'd had all they wanted, this snow, and they went looking for greener pasture. Well, I don't know how they're going to find it in snow, but they were gone. And we didn't find them till the next spring. Over the hill at the neighbor's ranch, I don't know how we even found them. Do you remember that? Somehow in the vet in town or somebody had posted. Anyway, we found our horses, and it cost us a lot of money to get them back because his hay was real expensive. Anyway, our south fence was this old abandoned irrigation flume, like I was telling you about, and sad enough shape, and it's hard to inspect and repair. But Lyn's horse, if there's a hole in it, he's going to find it. And there was one time, yeah, this one here talks about it. We had this chain link fence around our garden, and we had this I had a big roll of wire that I didn't have time to build a gate, so I just set this big roll of wire right in the gate opening. Figured that'll keep the horses out. Well, we came home one day, and we found her horse and my horse in the garden eating all the corn. Now the corn was about yay high, so you know it was just getting ready to head out, and they ate all that. But he'd stomped that wire, literally just pushed it to the ground, making a way to get in there. So this was not his first adventure into trouble, but he managed to. One of my first attempts to fix this flume, I stepped on this big old rusty nail, and it penetrated my boot and my foot. And of course, Lyn, being the ranch-raised girl that she is, she doctored a lot of horses. She says, I think I know how to fix that. So she went and stirred up some honey and some charcoal and put it all in a little kind of a pasty thing and stuck it on my foot and put a Band-Aid or a pad on it or some kind, and you know, that's how it never did get infected and it never did really hurt that much. So anyway, charcoal and honey, great cure for that stuff. Country life just seems to be full of surprises, and this next slide will show you exactly what I mean. I was dumping some dirt and the tailgate didn't open, and I'm raising the thing and I'm sitting there in the truck thinking any minute this thing's I'm gonna hear this dirt slide out of the back. And about the time it dawned on me, the dirt isn't gonna slide out of the back, the front of the truck starts coming off the ground. And now I'm sitting in there looking out, and I said to my wife, I said, I think I'm gonna, I didn't even tell her, I had to go get her. I went in the house, I jumped out, I went in the house and said, honey, you're not gonna believe what I just happened to me. So I had her come out, and appropriately she took pictures and begins to laugh. So I used the backhoe to pull it back down, and finagled with the gate, managed to get something to come open. There's a lever on the outside of the door on the driver's side to make that open, and I didn't push it quite far enough. And I learned to fix it right. So every once in a while we have unwelcome guests, and I'm going to let Lyn tell this story about her unwelcome guest. He looked a lot like that.
I don't know, you got me giggling. So I don't know if I can tell the story. Okay, well, Jack was out trucking, and I was home. It was in the fall. It was probably about September, October. And it was at nighttime that, you know, sun goes down real early in the fall. And we had this dog. She was a stray dog that just showed up at our place, and she was a black lab. Yeah, she was a black lab. Anyway, she was in the house with me, and normally she would not come in the house. But in the past few days, she was wanting in the house, so I let her in the house, you know. And so she was laying there, she started growling, you know, and I thought, what's your problem? And so she went to the front door, which is, it was a double, the sliding glass doors. We had that in the kitchen. And just before Jack left, with the big glass door fell out. So he put it back up and he nailed something and then he left. Well, it's a good thing he nailed it up. So the dog was barking, she was on this side of it, and no, she was just laying there growling. So, but she's kind of come in the kitchen and she looked at that window, and I had my little flashlight because we didn't have, you know, just gas lights. So I walked over to the door, couldn't see anything, pitch black outside, and I had my flashlight and I put it on the ground, you know, trying to see, and I saw these two black hairy legs, and I thought, oh my goodness, standing right there in front of the door, and I raised my flashlight, and there he had his nose up to the glass, and he's looking in at me, and I'm looking at him, and I says, oh my. So he starts pushing on the thing, and I says, oh, I'm glad Jack fixed that. So the dog just came unglued. I mean, she's on this side barking, and that old bear's on that side, and they're just looking at each other, and I thought, So I go in there, and we'd have a phone, because I called you. Mm-hmm. I can't remember what kind of a phone. It's probably an old cell phone somehow.
Those old bag phones, remember those kind?
Yeah. So I called him up, and he's out there in east somewhere, maybe New York. I don't know where he's at. And anyway, he's on the road, and I says, hey, honey, where's the guns? What do you need a gun for? I says, well, I got a visitor. Oh. But anyway, I didn't shoot the bear, obviously. I couldn't even see the bear if I walked out the door. I mean, he'd have been standing right there, and I probably missed because it's pitch black, and he's black. So anyway, I called the game warden, and I told him that we had a bear out here, because he didn't leave. He hung around. I mean, he tried to hibernate in our doghouse. We caught him with his head in there. He couldn't get the rest of his body in the doghouse. So, and that night was when Jack was home, and it was about 3 in the morning, so he gets his gun, and he opens the door, and he starts firing, and just, you know, really pelting his little behind, and that bear took off across. That's the last we saw him. I think that's what kind of drove him away. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we had some other funny stories about that bear, but because he hung around for about a month. He wouldn't leave. So, and that dog just have a fit all the time. But anyway, I always knew when the bear was around because the dog let me know.
Okay, we've had other visitors too. Canadian wolf, and they're all over in our area. And one day, Lyn was out feeding the horses, and my horse was standing over there just kind of fixed on something. He would not take it. They didn't come in to eat, you know. He would just stand there looking off in one particular direction by my shop. And so Lyn was telling me about it. I was not home at the time, and she was trying to figure out what in the world is the dog or the horse looking at. And finally, she kept looking further off on the hill, you know. And so finally, she looked a little closer, and here's this, not this particular one, but one that looked like this one, standing there in the trees looking at our horses. And the horse is looking at him. And so anyway, the standoff eventually just left, didn't he?
Yeah. The horses snorted
But
around.
we do have visitors. And then one day a mouse dropped in for breakfast. Yeah, literally dropped in. This is fairly recent too, by the way. She was telling me she was doing something in the kitchen, and all of a sudden behind her she hears this plop. So she looks around, and here's this baby mouse hit the kitchen table, bounced off the table, and landed on the floor. And he was kind of lethargic, like he'd gotten into some mouse bait somewhere, and he probably wasn't too long for this world. So I'm sorry for his indigestion, but anyway, how he got up there, I don't know. But anyway, there he was. So now we're going to talk a little bit about fires. In 2007, we got, it was a Labor Day weekend. We had our fifth wheel travel trailer all loaded on Thursday night. We were getting ready to go somewhere on Friday for the long weekend and spend a little day camping someplace. I don't know why we go camping. We can camp right where we're at, but maybe we wanted to change the scenery. So there was a fire that got started in a place called Indian Valley, which is just kind of over the hill from us, about maybe 8 miles as a crow flies. That's kind of where our horses went when they were missing. And so there was a lightning strike over there, and so when we drove home Thursday night, we went over the hill far enough to kind of see where it was at, and sure enough, yeah, there's a fire starting there. But it's, 7, 8 to 10 miles somewhere in that neighborhood from our place, so we didn't worry too much about it. Well, the next morning, about 4 o'clock in the morning, now these skylights I was telling you about, I think I'd rebuilt and replaced them by this time. They were in nicer skylights, but I'm laying there in bed about 4:30 in the morning, see a bright red glow in our skylights. And so the fire coming over the mountain lit up the night sky, and about 5 o'clock we get a knock on the door, and the Forest Service says, I think you guys better plan on leaving. And the embers were coming over the hill and landing all over our place. So we didn't leave. We just stayed there and got up and started pumping water everywhere, watering things down. And we stayed there throughout the whole ordeal to try to keep the place from burning up. And our place looked like O'Hare Airport there for a while, because planes coming, helicopters coming, dropping water and stuff going. It was quite a plane. Anyway, was it Friday? This was Friday.
Thursday night when it started.
Yeah, Thursday night and started Friday, and then what day did we get the rainstorm?
That night.
That night. Okay, Friday night.
I'll tell it.
Oh, you want to tell that story?
I can tell it.
All right.
About 6 o'clock that evening, the fire chief came and he told us, he says, we've done all that we can do. We can't save your place. So you guys have better leave. And we already had our pickup hooked up to the fifth wheel. We had everything kind of loaded. We had the horses off and everything already. So he says, okay. And they had Channel 7 was there from Boise, and they were interviewing the fire chief. They were interviewing Jack, and, they were just looking at the fires and all that stuff. Well, it was hot. It was Labor Day weekend, and not a cloud in the sky, hot. And so I thought, well, I'll go out to the garden and gather a few things from my garden before we leave. So I went and got some stuff, and then I came into the house. And as soon as I came in the house, I heard this real big bang. And so, wow, what's that? And I looked out the window, and a strong wind had come up. And we lived down in a canyon, and this fire was just to the south of us. And this wind had come down this canyon very strong, and it broke a limb off the tree and went right across our bridge. And I was looking at that, and the next thing we saw was this sheet of water, and it came right behind that wind. And it was literally a sheet of water, and it blanketed our place. And the people out there with their fancy cameras, here's all these, TV cameras out there, they were scrambling to get them covered because it came that fast. They were grabbing anything they could to put over their cameras, One minute they were sitting there dripping sweat, and the next minute water was dripping off their hats. And that was absolutely an incredible miracle. And then we were standing in a couple inches of water, and it just blanketed just our place. Nobody else even knew it rained. I mean, it didn't really rain. It was a sheet of water. The Lord protected us so miraculously that the fire chief said, he looked up and he says, that water came at the 11th hour and 59th second. And that's what he said, and it was recorded. And we all stood around there just in shock. And my sister was driving. She was the highway 95 is about 5 miles from our ranch. She was driving south, and she looked over there, right over the area of our ranch, and she saw the most beautiful rainbow. So she got out, not knowing what just happened, and she took a picture. And that picture got on the front of our newspaper with a title underneath it, "The Wright's Ranch was saved." And it was a total miracle, and everybody knew it. So, and I want to kind of add this as a witness, what this can do, this testimony. Just before Jack and I came down here, Jack had some gravel delivered to our place, and the man who delivered it, we know him, he's a good friend, but he's not a real religious man. And so anyway, I went to give him the check, and so he was looking up there because we had just had another fire. And he's looking up there at the trees. He says, "Wow, that fire got pretty close to you." And I says, "Yeah, it did." And I told him about this incident that happened in 2007. And I says, "Remember that fire in 2007?" He says, "Yeah." So I told him the story I just told you. And he's sitting there looking at me. And then he kind of turned. And then he turned around, and he just reached out, and he grabbed me, and he hugged me, and he says, "For Christ's sake, you caused me to cry." And I mean, tears were in his eyes, but it touched his heart to know, because I told him this, the last thing I said, I says, "God saved our place." And that's what caused him to cry. And, but anyway, now Jack can tell you this latest fire.
Anyway, definitely a saved issue with God there. He helped us a bunch, and that's a great witnessing opportunity we've had to share. And then 2007 was our first experience, and then 2018, fire strikes again. And this is a driveway out in front of our place as the road turns off to go to our place, right off to by that sign there, actually. And there's another view of that same general area. When a fire gets going, it creates its own weather patterns, as you're kind of well aware. And the fire that we had in 2007, praise the Lord, we did not lose one tree, not one fence post, not one spark. The fire went when that wind blew around our place, and then the firefighters, it gave them a little kind of a reprieve to get in there, and they started backfire and dug fire lines right on our property lines, and kind of then backfired to where the fire was at. So we were real fortunate that particular time. And this time we weren't quite as fortunate, but God still saved our house, and we were able to keep going. This fire here burned probably 3/4 of our trees and about half our fences, and it burned up a lot of brush. I was planning on logging the hillside this year that got burnt, and the brush that grows up in around them trees is so hard to get through it, to even get to the bottom of a tree to cut it down. And so I was always kind of procrastinating a little bit because I didn't want to have to tackle that job, and I knew it was going to be a big job. Well, after this fire went through, and I went up there to survey the damage, and I got to looking, and it's like, well, there's still a blessing even in the fire, because now the underbrush is gone. It'd be real easy to get to the trees. So we just had to get them cut this year because they were burnt so bad they weren't going to live. And so anyway, that was...
Came within 75 feet of our house.
Yeah, the fire got within 75 feet of the house that time. Before I get back into this one here, I'll talk a little bit more about the fire one. We were having lunch with some Adventist friends of ours. They were from Milton, Freewater, Oregon. They had come over that particular weekend that the fire started. And we were in having some lunch. We'd been out fighting fire, dragging hoses here and there and doing what we can. We thought we had a little bit of a break in the schedule a little bit, and we went in and made some lunch. And we were in there eating lunch, and I hear this horrendous sound that sounds like a jet engine. And the only thing I could think of was some big jets going over, dropping water on the fire. And we knew the fire was getting close, but we weren't sure exactly how close. I mean, it's all smoky everywhere. Well, when I went outside, I could tell that it wasn't a jet engine. The whole mountain right behind the house was just engulfed in flame. And the draft that creates sounds just like a jet engine. So anyway, we were fast to leave. I went back in the house. I says, drop everything. We got to go, and we got to go now. And so we did, and we progressed out to this intersection out here, and because this had already kind of burned through there, it wasn't as bad as what you see right now. So we felt safe there, and we just stood back and prayed and watched the Lord protect our place again. And there was two helicopters showed up about that time with some water in their big tub things, and they dropped it on the worst part of the flame. And the Lord blessed us with just enough wind to kind of push the flame a little bit kind of sideways past our house. And then here come another helicopter with a load of water, and he dropped it on. Actually, I think it was a female pilot in that one, and she did a little better job. She dropped it, man, she hit bullseye where the worst it was, and it dampened things down enough that the wind then kind of carried it a little bit past the house, and then the firefighters could come in and kind of take care of things from there. So we were certainly blessed with that adventure again. Now, in 2018, which was about 3 months later, my truck was in the shop for repairs, and then the shop burnt down, and my truck with it. This was my work truck, so that's what it looked like before the fire. That's what it looked like after the fire. And there was absolutely nothing left of it. That fire was over 5,000 degrees, they said. It just, it totally decimated it. And so the Lord blessed me. Fortunately, I had it insured, and between insurance money and I had to add some with it, I was able to replace it. And that was a pickup I had down here last spring when we were here, but we didn't bring it this time. Yeah, so anyway, my thought is, but do not despair. Despite all the challenges, all the problems that you're no doubt going to face, there's promises for us. As when you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers they will, or excuse me, through the rivers, I think it should say though, maybe. Though the rivers, they will not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned or scorched, nor will the flame kindle upon you. For every challenge, God has always been there to provide a solution. And your faith really grows when you see God in action on your behalf. I mean, really seriously. It's unbelievable when you see, and you know there's no other solution, no other answer, and you know that God stepped up when you really most needed him. Then recreation abounds everywhere, so it's not all work and it's not all hard challenges. There is some fun, and I've got a few minutes left to share with you a little bit about some of the enjoyable things that we get to enjoy as a result of living where we live. And these things are available to you folks too whenever you find your way into the country life as well. Horseback rides, pack trips, and so on and so forth. This is one we went on, and that's Lyn up there leading the pack horse, and one of our particular trips. And then there's the lakes that you can enjoy, and Lyn went out in the lake. It was really a hot, dry day, and so that lake was real inviting for water. Horses enjoyed it. If you've never been on a horse, this is what it looks like from sitting in the middle of the horse looking at the water. Lyn's horse had a long neck. He just, and that's me with the same area we went in, and this is another day, another trip. There's a whole story with that trip. I won't get into that now, but yeah, I don't want to share too much of that story. But anyway, it was, I had a serious accident on that trip and ended up breaking a leg. But anyway, so it's not all peaches and cream. And I don't know how many times I've been on horseback out doing things, and you know, sooner or later you're going to have a wreck, and I had one. Anyway, here's some friends. We showed up. This is quite a number of years ago. We got to do a lot of horseback riding with friends, our church family and stuff, and a lot of them have horses up there, so we got to enjoy outings together. And occasionally you run into a convenience out on the trail that you're not aware of, but oh man, there's a convenience. By the way, that's Lyn's horse. So I don't know where Lyn went, but I have an idea. She's in there. So fishing on the river, we have good fishing. This is a river that fronts our property, and there's real good trout fishing in that. And so there's things we can do there. There's lakes not too far away you can enjoy. And so for those of you who like to fish, there's a lot of that things going on. Or you can enjoy a dip in a nearby spring. It's a 2-mile horseback ride or by foot to get to this spring here. It's a hot water that comes kind of off the mountain right close here. It's just up the hill about 100 feet. And it goes into this creek, and it's called Warm Spring Creek. And so there's places where we dam the creek up, or we do, or other people that hike up there and make little pools down there, and the water comes in there and dilutes with the creek water, and it makes it actually tolerable temperature-wise. Otherwise, that water's way too hot to enjoy a dip in the creek. So there's fun things to do there. Cookouts are always a real popular thing to do. This is our place where we had a brothers get together at our place a year or so ago, and so we're making cowboy hash, and tomorrow morning we're going to be making cowboy hash out here again. And so that's one of our favorite menu items that we always enjoy. And so there's a creek that runs right, it's kind of hard to see it. It's not flowing as heavily as it was in one of them earlier pictures, but it does run year-round fairly well. It's always fun for outdoor church or family gatherings, places you can do things outdoors that you just take advantage of the weather and a nice environment. And this is another one of those such events that we have, and that's our filbert tree there, that little one in the middle. And I wish I had a pointer I could point it out, but there's two walnut trees down there, about 3 filbert trees, a crabapple tree, and an apple tree and a cherry tree, all in that little spot.
And a plum.
And a plum tree, and yeah, and there's a peach,
and a pear.
And a pear. I think we planted those after this picture was taken. This is a road that goes past our place up the hill a little ways, and it's a great place to go for walks and just enjoy it. A lot of time our Sabbath afternoons, the weather's nice, we'll just go for a nice long walk up there, and if we're not doing that, sometimes we've rode horses up that road many times, and it's just, we can go for 20 some miles that direction, you come to the next town over the hill. It's actually 30 miles from our porch to the next town if you go that way. Snowmobiling is a popular sport in our area. They go right up that same road I just showed you a picture of. They kind of unload at our driveway, and then they can go all over the country up there, so there's a lot of outdoor activities to do, even in the snow. And of course, in a town near us, there's ice sculptures that happens, I think, every year in January. And I don't know if that's well enough to see it, but they do some really fun things in the wintertime. It's a place called McCall, Idaho, if you've ever heard of it. And it's kind of a Sun Valley it's like Sun Valley if you've ever seen Sun Valley in Idaho. It's similar to Vail, Colorado in a sense. And so McCall is kind of a resort town. They got a nice big lake there. It's about 35, 40 miles from where we live. And they do a lot of ice sculptures. There's always something going on in McCall, good places to eat, and a lot of fun things to do there. But they get a lot of snow, too. That's why I don't live in McCall. So this is more family outdoors get-togethers. And so now in closing, so with God's help and His blessings, someday I want to hear your story. And you just now need to go make it happen and enjoy the journey. And it's challenging, but it's very rewarding. And so hopefully I've shared enough to inspire you to want to go make it happen in your neck of the woods. And so I think that's about it. We've got a minute left, so I think we've timed that one just about right. If anybody has any questions that you kind of like to have answered, catch up with me anywhere at any time. And if you have a specific question, we thought about making a questions and answer session here, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily needed. But if you do have questions, I may not have an answer, but I'll try, and or refer you to somebody who might have it. And unique situations that's unique to you that you'd want some encouragement on, want me to pray with you over an issue, or any of those things, I'd be more than happy to do that. So anyway, let's close with prayer today. Kind Father in heaven, we count it a real privilege to have been able to share the things in our experience that hopefully is helpful to others, to encourage them to want to go out and start fitting their plan together and making something come together for them. And we pray that you'll inspire them and encourage them, and especially the single folks that are kind of doing this journey by themselves. And perhaps there's someone that can partner up with them and they can share tools and equipment and time and talent and resources, or there's someone like our place that's available at some point in time for those that just haven't been able to make it come together, and perhaps we can be a blessing one way or another with them. And we just pray your Spirit will be felt here, and that people will be encouraged to go out and actually make the first step and get something started in their life. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.